actually have it on a sanding block so it's nice and flat because we're going to be doing these flat surfaces here. This is where we had that deep groove. And I'm making it even with the rest of the wheel. Alright, so all our surfaces here are nice and smooth. They're all feathered in. You can see where that gouge was. That's nice and smooth. I can't even feel it with my finger. Now all we have to do is work on sanding the rim, and then we're ready for paint. Now with the rim, we're not going to be using a sanding block because it's a curved surface. So we're just going to be using a piece of sandpaper that we're going to bend around the rim. And just glide that sandpaper over the entire rim and don't focus on one spot. When you're almost done, feel around for any bumps, and when you feel one, sand it down until it's smooth. Now this is turning out amazing. You can see the rim here with all the spots filled in by the Bondo. That gray right there used to be little indentations, all curb rash, but now it's nice and smooth. I can't even feel it with my finger. If I close my eyes and try to feel that, it feels smooth, which is perfect. Our indentation over here, you can see it because it's filled by the Bondo. Again, close my eyes, I can't even feel it. Perfect. So that was with our 80 grit. Now we're going to go jump to 320 grit, and then we're going to spray it with primer. So we're almost done with step 3. We're going to sand down the whole wheel with our 320 grit. We just want to get rid of any of those 80 grit scratches and just make the wheel a lot smoother than it is right now. Now you don't have to get the surface perfectly smooth with this 320 grit. We're just trying to cut down any of the really deep scratches from the 80 grit. The reason why we don't have to get it perfect is because our primer is a primer filler. So it's going to fill those 80 grit scratches for the most part. So just focus on getting out the deeper ones, and then we're ready to paint. Okay, we're done with the 320 grit. Now we want to wipe the wheel down and make sure you clean the wheel thoroughly. Before we move to the last step where we paint, there's something called glazing and spot putty, which is probably overkill for a wheel, but I want to show you quickly what it does. It's like a skim coat. All you have to do is apply a thin layer over any minor imperfections that you see. And then 30 minutes later, sand it down with 320 grit until smooth, and you can see how the putty fills the small scratches and imperfections. Now you can hit the wheel with some air and wipe down the wheel one last time with alcohol. And now we're ready for our last step, step 4, where we're going to paint the wheel. We'll be using this gray primer filler, which will be filling any small imperfections, and it also primes the surface of the wheel for our silver paint. After the primer, we'll use a color base coat. After the color base coat, we'll use a clear coat. Now, I'm going to be painting both the face of the wheel as well as the back of the wheel, but I'm not going to show you painting the back of the wheel because it's the same process. So let's start with this primer. Now, for the first coat, you want a light coat, so don't worry about covering the full wheel. Make sure you start spraying away from the wheel and then move across the wheel and then stop spraying away from the wheel. This will give you a better paint finish. And that's coat 1. Now give it a few minutes, and now we can spray coat 2. Coat 2 could be thicker and cover more of the wheel. And make sure you're moving around the wheel and spraying at different angles to get complete coverage. Now we can let this dry for a few minutes, and we're on to coat 3, our last coat. With this coat, we want complete coverage, so make sure you don't leave any bare metal. Also, make sure to move around the wheel again to get at different angles, and this is looking great. Now we have to wait for this to dry for about an hour before we sand it down. As you wait for it to dry, go work on the other wheels. Now about an hour later, actually waited an hour and a half, the primer's completely dried, and we're going to sand it with 600 grit sandpaper. We're not going to wet sand it. Normally when you're at 600 grit, you want to wet sand it, but I don't want to get any water on here, and you want to make sure that this is completely dry when you paint it. So we're going to do a light sand of 600 grit. Remember, if your sandpaper gets caked up, just flick it with your finger, and what you want to do is you want to just get the whole surface smooth and sand it down with that 600 grit, which will make it ready for paint. Good. Now what you want to do is you just want to feel around and feel for any areas that are still a little rough, anything that you might have missed, and you also want to look for anything that has indents, scratches, because anything that you could visually see right now is going to show up in paint. And this is looking great. The reason why you use your 600 grit to sand down the primer is because the primer leaves like a rough texture on the surface because it builds up into those scratches. And you just want to get that smooth so that you don't see that in your paint work. But this is looking good.